these were God's plans in action, and that I had to walk or be dragged kicking and screaming through all of them. All of the dust and all of the pain were really teaching or strengthening me for the next of the journey that I have been on. Although I was not raised in a Christian home, I was always a believer. I always knew that there was a God, and when I was little, my grandma told me that if I ever doubted that there was a God, all I had to do was look at any leaf on any tree, and every shape and every vein had a specific purpose, and that this did not happen by some big bang. I adored her, and I hung on her every word, and this was something that always stuck with me. I always remember getting dressed up and going to church on Easter and on Christmas. These were not so bad, but when Vacation Bible School came around, once I got a little older, it was terrifying because someone would always ask me a question that I had no idea whatsoever how to answer. It made me feel embarrassed and ashamed, and I didn't really know if the other kids giggled or not, but I always felt like they were. It was it was part of the reason. It was part of the reason I avoided any kind of spotlight, and I became very, very comfortable just being by myself and blinging to the walls and being quiet in hopes that no one would notice me. Most of my earliest memories that I have were where the trouble started. I really don't remember a whole lot about my younger days, but really most of my memories started around the time that my sister was born. I had two older cousins that lived in Oklahoma City, and they would come to visit for a week or two at a time, and about once a year. And those times were a lot of fun because it was music and laughter out in my grandma's backyard. But pretty much, I was the queen of the hop, being the only grandchild in close proximity and being the only child at home. My sister was born when I was 8. She got a lot of attention being new and adorable, and then when she was about 3 months old, she got very sick and was in the hospital for about a week in Tulsa. And I didn't understand all of the dynamics at the time, so I began a lifelong journey of feeling insecure and feeling like I had to compete for attention and affection from my family. Ironically, this was at the same time that I was hiding from being noticed by other people. My dad inherited a farm, which I talk about a lot on Facebook. Those are some great, great memories. He inherited a farm with the land, cattle, equipment, the whole shebang, from a widow with no children that he used to take care of whenever she was sick and in her later years. He took such good care of her in those last years as a cancer victim in a time where there was no plastic surgery, no reconstruction. She was missing an eye, her nose, the roof of her mouth, and the top of her lip. I was terrified of her at first, but yeah, watching him tend so lovingly to her, I soon was right there beside him, and I learned compassion and patience at Dad's right hand. This was probably my introduction to serving work. That is another thing that stuck. There were some of the best years working side by side with my dad on the farm. I became content and secure during those years, and we worked in comfortable silence, and I think that was my favorite part. I would not trade those years for any amount of money, but there were still things going on. Both of my parents were raised in alcoholic households. While neither of them drank, they still carried baggage from their upbringing and the home and life that they built together and raised their kids in. It was unfortunately many, many years before I understood that phenomenon. My mom, whose dad was a long-haul truck driver and he was gone for weeks at a time, leaving two kids to be raised by an alcoholic mother, volatile and downright mean. I see signs of mental illness, but it was not widely known at that time and hidden away if anybody knew anything about it. As a way to compensate for her upbringing, my mom had to exert complete control over me. what I ate, how I dressed, and who I could talk to. I was never allowed to have friends over or go to their house, and after a while of turning everybody down and all the invitations, people would stop trying. In my high school and middle school years, I was not allowed to go to school activities or hang out with anyone. And on Monday morning, when everybody was gathered up talking about football or basketball games, I, of course, had nothing to add to the conversation. And over the years, though no one was ever particularly unkind to me, I pretty much was just left alone, and I missed out on the social aspect of my middle and high school years, which crippled me socially for much of my life. My father had an alcoholic father. He would work for a while, but alcohol would overtake him, and he would go for long periods of time without working. 4 little boys went to bed hungry a lot. As all 4 of them started working when they were very young, usually about 8 or 10, 12 years old, to help the household, a new disease took place of the alcohol. It was workaholism, and that's actually a thing. Workaholic is a thing. To an extent, it might sound admirable, but really it was not. My dad worked a full-time job as a lab and x-ray technician, and he worked out on the farm. He worked to make sure that we always had a home and food and everything we needed, but to do this, he never paid attention to what was happening at home. That was left up to my mom, and she was smothering the life right out of me, and he never noticed. When I finally got that breakout by going to college, I was not really prepared for anything that I should have been prepared for. I had no practice at making decisions, good or bad, and I had no idea what a good friend or a bad friend would ever even look like. All I knew is that I was free, free, free. In no time, I was wilder than a March hare and enjoying every minute of freedom. If someone even so much looked at me like they were going to try to control me, I would have no part of it, and that continues today. It's a good thing and a bad thing. When I moved to Fayetteville after graduation, nothing changed. I did what I wanted, when I wanted, and however I wanted to do it. I realize now that walking with the devil is easy, and it was fun, and it seemed to me that walking with God would be miserable. It would be like being controlled by my mother again, and I wanted no part of it until I went to the doctor one day, and I thought I had the flu. Imagine my surprise at 25 when I found out that I indeed did not have the flu. I was pregnant. Well, now, while I lived in a college town with a club every 10 feet, all I thought of was having a wonderful time, and I thought I was having a wonderful time. It was ladies' night somewhere all the time. I love loud music, I love to dance, and it's kind of strange. With more alcoholic relatives than not alcoholic relatives, I love to drink. But in that one moment, I gave up every bit of that. I was not even out of the doctor's office yet, and what seemed like so much fun now seemed awful. My baby did not need a mom standing on a chair in a club at closing time singing Redneck Mother. A new season began, and it was a really happy one. We were raising kids, and it was Freddie and TJ, which was my stepson, and Dakota and I. And we had 2.5 precious, precious years. When Freddie was killed in his car wreck, this happiness was stripped away in seconds, and I became unwound. Dark, dark, dark times of depression, which I've had bouts of since childhood, and a ripping apart of my family and my home. Since a single mom could not make it in a college town, I moved back to Veneta, and in a very bizarre twist, I married Wade and had Bailey. Some of that time was good. Raising the kids was really fun. They were really, really good kids, but I was trying to raise them so much different than what... Hi, Sean. I was trying to raise them so much different than the way I did that I went to a whole other extreme. And I had lulled myself into thinking that life would be easy street from then on, but no. There was one night whenever I came home and I had just had a major surgery. And I had been out riding with my mom just to get out for a while. And I came home and I found Dakota overdosed. And this was my introduction into the world of drugs and what that was all going to be about. Um, I was like a fish out of water. And I tried to do all of the things that common sense tells you to do. You know, I tried to control him. I tried to keep him home. Well, he did go to rehab, but whenever he came home, and I drove him crazy. I drove myself crazy. I'm sure I drove Wade crazy, but he probably wouldn't tell you that. And it was rough. It was rough, and I wound up really, really sick. And like I say, I was trying to do the best I could, and I went up to, at that time, it was drug-free societies. It's Grand Nation now, but at that time it was drug-free societies, and they had the free drug test kits. So I was a regular visitor up there. And then this is where things start turning again. There's lots of twists and turns in this story, like there are in everybody's. Once I got involved with them, they sent me to Al-Anon, and that was the turning point for me. It was before I started coming to church. Al-Anon was the turning point to me. Because let me tell you, whenever I was in the emergency room, and I didn't know if he was going to live or die, and they were lining up all of this equipment because he had huffed computer cleaner, the computer air thing. There's no Narcan for that. There's nothing for that. What you do with that is you put them in a room and you put every piece of equipment all the way around them. And if the kidneys quit working, then they catheterize them. If the lungs quit working, they trach them. If, just different things as they start popping up. And so we were in the hospital that night. As luck would have it, none of this stuff came up. And the next day, he had to go to rehab. So anyway, but when I was in that in that emergency room, and everybody was standing around, and the first thing out of my mom's mouth, "This is your fault." And the first thing out of my sister's mouth, "How could you let this happen? How could you let this happen?" Meanwhile, I'm telling myself all these things anyway, and I'm not getting any support. I'm just having these bad feelings. I'm a terrible mother. I'm a failure as a mother, and all this stuff. And so instead of somebody building me up, I had people helping me tear myself down. So whenever I got into Al-Anon, one of the first things I learned was that was his, not mine. That his drug problem was his, and his to deal with, and that I needed to work on myself. And in Al-Anon, we work the same 12 steps as AA and NA. So that's, kind of a basis for that. And not long after that, I started going to the meetings, and I wound up on the board up there. I got to go to Washington, D.C. and talk to some senators about there are drugs here. I don't care what you want to try to say. There are drugs here. They're killing our children. They're ruining our societies. And so I got to go and give a big talk to them, and then go to a bunch of meetings. And from the time, his overdose, it was probably 10 months before I got into Al-Anon, several months. I was so strong by then. I was so strong. And it's a strength I didn't know that I had. So I grabbed onto that strength, and I held on to it. So then we started coming to church out here. And, we hadn't been here no time. And Shannon said something. People, we can't get mad about everything somebody says. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they don't think. But she said something, and I'm like, that's it. I'm out of here. And it was something about, she said, any parent that doesn't know that their kids are on drugs are just not paying attention. They're just not, they're just not with it. And I'm sitting here going, but that's not true. That's not true. But I know now she didn't know different. So she's learned like a million things over the years. I had actually thought a long, long time ago that we needed a CR. But I didn't think her and Kevin would go for it at all. But while God was working in my life doing this, he was in their life doing this. And at some point in time, they came to me and says, we're thinking about starting a Celebrate Recovery. Would you like to be involved in that? Oh, yes, I would. At that time, I've only got one CR person. I've got a few CR people. Don't get mad and leave. Okay, wait till I finish. Don't get mad and leave. Because I'm going to say something that you probably didn't know. When I came out here and I said that I would be happy to serve because I am a servant. I am a serving person. God has given me a serving heart. And anyway, I'm like, well, sure, I'll come out and, and feed him and, and do all that stuff, and that'll be great. But I was never interested in any of y'all's stories. Because at that time, now listen, at that time, the only thing I was concerned about with my Al-Anon work and what I had been through was the families and the friends of all of this. And so that lasted almost through the first night. And then I got to knowing everybody. And then I got to visiting with everybody. And then I got to hearing the stories. And then I started seeing people get cars, and I started seeing people get apartments, and I started seeing people get their kids back. And now, let me tell you guys, I'm all in. I'm all in. But God took me through all of this other stuff to get me there. So, can I share just a tiny bit about the other night? So, the other night, whenever I found out that Delena's son was in the emergency room and why, I was like, okay, God, you've prepared me for this. I know just how she feels, and I need to get out there and support her before somebody comes in and tells her this is your fault. And so I went out there, and the first thing I said was, how's he doing? And the second thing I said was, what can I do to support you? What can I do to help you out? Because I learned. It's all about learning. And so anyway, so I didn't want any of my CR people to just jump right up and walk right out of here and say, well, this old heifer don't care nothing about us, because that's not true. That's not true. My heart has changed, and now y'all are my superheroes. And so I think that is about it. Oh, I want to tell y'all about my new season. You know, there was a season of the dirt, and there was a season of of pain. There's been lots of seasons of pain. Somehow he always brings me around. It always winds up being something that can be used. And right now, I'm in a new era of sweat and uncomfortableness. And it's not just because of the summer. And so I know he's got something working in me, and I don't know what it is. But I have isolated myself pretty much since January. I just feel this need for isolation. I feel this need for healing. I feel this need for strength that right now I can't share my strength with other people. I'm trying to build it up, because people take a lot of strength out of me, because I have this heart that's like as big as everything. And so I know that he's put me through this for a reason, and I'm kind of curious to see what it is. I think, by now, maybe he's sending me away from cleaning houses, because I hurt. My hands hurt, and my knees hurt, and my hips hurt, and I can't sleep because everything hurts. And so maybe he is building me up and strengthening me, and he's going to send me into some new direction. And so I'm pretty excited to see what that is, but it's not time yet. So anyway, my testimonies. The first one was the money in the red bag. And I think probably a lot of y'all have heard this one, because I've done it at church once. There was a time when, it was all so much. Because Dakota was still in recovery, and I was still insane, trying to manage him. And Wade wasn't doing well, and with his back and with just, a whole lot of things, and he lost his job. It was very unexpected. At that time, I was cleaning like 2 houses. And we came so close. We came so close to losing everything. Anyway, there was one time we were on our way to church, and I was getting ready to write a hot check for a tithe. I was going to have money by the time it went through, but technically I was writing a hot check for a tithe. And he had a doctor's appointment, and it was going to be a $25 copay, and he had medicine to pick up, and that was going to be $35. We needed gas in the van for him to go. This was all going to be on Monday. And he had this red bag that he carried all the time. He carried it when he was at work, and it absolutely drove me off the wall. He still carries it now, and it's all ripped and torn, and oh my goodness gracious. But that's a whole nother story. Anyway, he was digging through there. He'd been through there a million times. And on the way out here, I'm going like, okay, if this church thing is for me, then I need a sign. And I don't mean I need some little sign. I mean I need something lit up in neon. I need to know, because I'm on the fence. Am I going to continue with church? Am I just going to go on and do my own thing? Anyway, he was digging through there, and he found a $50 bill, which would pay the copay and his medicine. And I'm like, I'm like, hey, keep digging. Keep digging in there. See what else you can come up with. Anyway, altogether, he came up with $150, and it was enough to cover, the trip, the medicine. He could run and get him something to eat and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay. I got you loud and clear. I can trust you, and I can put all of my trust in you, and that's what I did, and I've never looked back on that. All the things that's happened since then, I've never looked back on that. Anyway, here's the second one. There was a little girl. When I worked at McDonald's, I worked out in the play place. I was a manager out there. And there was this little girl that came in with her dad, and she had one of the oxygen things, but she had it all the time, so it like screwed into her throat. And her name was Renelle. And there was one time that she wanted to go down the slide so bad, so we took everybody out of the play place. And we got over by the platform, and I told him, her dad, I said, okay, do it now. So he unhooked all of that, and I went scrambling up all those steps, and we came down that slide, and as soon as we came down, he put that thing back in there. But she had the best time. She just squealed, and she laughed, and anyway, I fell in love with her right then. And I'd lost track over the years, and she's still been very, very sick her whole life. But anyway, she got especially sick here about 3 months ago, and she was at death's door. I don't even know. Like every 3 days, she was at death's door. And this time here was particularly bad. And anyway, they wanted everybody to pray at 7 o'clock. And so I was praying, and I was praying for all I was worth. And I was praying for her the same way I had prayed for Dakota, on my knees, crying, because I was crying for Dakota. Just don't let him die. Just don't let him die. Whatever, we can fix whatever. Just don't let him die. And so I was praying something very similar with her. And I heard God just as clear as if he was standing in the room with me. And he says, stop begging, start believing. And I'm like, oh, well, that just changed my whole entire, I have a much different prayer life now than I did then. So anyway, that's all I've got. Does anybody have any questions? I'd be happy to answer questions. Nobody? Nobody wants to talk to me? Okay, I think we're through. I will clean for Pat and nobody else. I will clean for Pat, but nobody else. Yeah, 23 years is really starting to take a toll. It's really starting to take a toll. There's actually times now where I wake up and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go do this. And I've never done that in 23 years. I've never not wanted to go to clean a house. So anyway, that's it. that was more drug related. It's like, oh my gosh, people don't do this. And I had presentations and, and all that stuff. And I'm like, well, this is not that. This is church. This is testimony. But to give a testimony, you have to give those